Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of Couple of Nukes. As always, I'm your host, Mr. Whiskey, and I'm excited for today's episode because, today's guest has done something that not many people do, but a lot of great people do, which is they saw an issue and instead of just complaining about it, wallowing about it, they went and made a solution for it. I've had guests on the show that have done that for stuff from breathing and EFT tapping to fitness and coaching. And today we're going to be talking about a gap he saw in the world of addiction treatment and what he has done successfully between opening up clinics to writing a book to helping other people, what that looks like. Mr. Trent Carter, great to have you here.
Hey, thank you so much for having me on. I'm excited for this conversation.
Yeah, so I kind of hinted there that you saw a problem in addiction treatment, but obviously that's not where you didn't come out of the womb and say, "Oh, wow, addiction treatment is not going too well." Tell us a little bit about your journey to how you got to that point.
Sure. So, yeah, you're exactly right. I kind of stumbled into this not knowing that it was going to be my calling. I'm thankful that I did because at this point we've helped so many people and it's something that's truly passionate to me. But yeah, so I went to school to become a registered nurse. And so I did nursing for many years and then went back to school to become a nurse practitioner. And that's really where I first got a little hint of treating patients that were struggling with opioid abuse. I was doing clinical rotations with a family practice doctor. He had a private practice, and he had just a few patients that he was treating that had struggled with opioid abuse. He wasn't doing a fantastic job at it, but nonetheless, he was helping these folks out and it was changing their lives. And I thought that that was incredible to see how quickly they could make a change, how quickly they could turn around, how appreciative they were. And then, finding themselves transforming into the person that they used to be or that they knew they could be, but they were gripped by this addiction. And so, fast forward a little bit, I ended up opening my own practice, Renew Health, to do that very thing. So, we treat substance abuse, we treat mental health, and we're located in New Mexico. And at this point, we're statewide. We have multiple locations and we help thousands of folks out.
Right. So I'd like to focus in on what was the gap you were seeing? What kind of were the flaws, or not even necessarily flaws, but things that could be done better?
Yeah, so in New Mexico, the gap is that there's hardly any help at all. There's no resources really. So my first location that I opened was in Roswell, New Mexico, which many
Mm,
folks have probably heard of because the alien crash and
yeah.
whatnot back in, many years ago. There's hardly any help at all. That's especially that it's truly dedicated for substance abuse, not somebody like that doctor that I had mentioned. He's treating diabetes and cholesterol and someone that's ill, put them on antibiotics, things like that. And then he just had a few patients that he was trying to help out because they had been his patients and they're coming in and he sees that they're struggling. So he took that on himself. Hey, I can maybe help them out. And so that's going to be most common to what was happening around here. Whereas Renew Health, we're dedicated solely to that. I don't treat diabetes and blood pressure. We treat substance abuse. We treat mental health. And so that alone is a major difference. And then, again, the fact that oftentimes people who may be treating someone that's struggling with substance abuse, addiction, they're not necessarily always going to be specialized or certified in it. It's just something where maybe they've got a patient that they care for and they decided, hey, I can try to help them out, which I think is admirable and fantastic. But if you can find someone like all our providers here at Renew Health that truly specialize and it's all they do, it's just going to make a big difference.
Right. Completely agree. Fortunately, the aliens didn't land and set up a clinic or a center for addiction treatment. But I hear what you're saying a lot because it's one of my biggest critiques of the military, actually, especially in the mental health provision resources and in general. So something I've shared before on the show is, there isn't like a dedicated financial expert. What happens is the command kind of says, all right, who here is good with finances? Petty officer so and so, you seem like you're kind of good with finances. You got a nice car. You're in charge of everyone's financial responsibilities and budgeting and stuff like that. And so, yeah, what we need is someone who's dedicated and certified financial expert. That is their sole job in the military. They're not also a nuclear operator who's working on a reactor, stand and watch, and then in their free time they get jabbed with, hey, now you got to meet with someone and help them with their finances. So we see that a lot in the military, also medical side with, hey, there's not enough individualized care and mental health care. We have a few providers who can only see so many people, and it's a very surface level thing. It's very checkbox, like on a scale of 1 to 10, how are you feeling today, yesterday, this stuff. There's no specialized care. There's not enough people with degrees in certifications in psychology, in mental health. They're just, like you said, just doctors. They're just general, practitioners who, like you said, are treating, and then, oh, now we have to deal with this. So I agree that that specialized, individualized care is so important for people to have. And I think, like you said, there are gaps because America is just a huge place. The world is just a huge place. And, we'll see, oh, there's lot of addiction treatment stuff going on, but that doesn't mean it's in every location. It's not readily available. And I just did an episode actually on public education and awareness about these resources, about these clinics, about how public schools should have a section dedicated to that where children, our children, our youth that we care about and who are going to take over, that they can find these resources for suicidal ideation, for getting help with alcohol or substance abuse, and not worry about confronting their parents or having that conversation with a teacher or a guidance counselor. So I think it's so important that people know about these resources and that they're established. So tell us a little bit about that whole process of opening up your own clinic, being an entrepreneur. Like you said, it was something you kind of stumbled upon. So I was as a huge endeavor.
Yeah, definitely. So, real quick, man, I'll touch on something you said though. Fortunately, there are people that are still willing to do something, even though they're not going to be an expert in it, right? Like you
For
said, the
sure.
petty officer helping with finances is better than nothing. Man, another thought is, hey, look, if you've got a buddy that's not a mechanic, but he's able to do a couple things on your vehicle and come help you out, we appreciate that. But as soon as it gets too complex, what's the answer? You go to the mechanic that knows what to do.
Right.
And it's the same thing here. So I just wanted to touch on that. Process for opening my own clinic, man, it was a huge endeavor. So actually, I was living in Texas whenever I was doing these clinical rotations and I was working with that doctor where I first got exposed. And we moved to New Mexico. The rationale there is I'm a nurse practitioner. In the state of Texas, a nurse practitioner to practice, to have a practice, you've got to be underneath a doctor, whether it's medical doctor or DO. And I just didn't want to do that. I didn't want to be attached to a doctor when I didn't think it was necessary. And so we moved to New Mexico where I opened a practice. And I'm proud to say, look, I've got nothing against doctors. Doctors are fantastic. I have many that are friends, many I collaborate with that I support, they support me. But I don't have a single doctor on payroll. I only hire nurse practitioners because we don't have to practice under a doctor here in New Mexico. And so that was a big reason why we came to New Mexico. Plus, my wife is from New Mexico. We had family here. We didn't just throw a dart at the map and land. It's a
Right.
little more
Right.
strategic than that. But, anyways, I didn't really have any formal business experience prior to. And so it was a risk. There was a lot of unknown. There was absolutely zero guarantee. I mean, we sold our house in Fort Worth, Texas, and I had two little children and my wife, and we packed up and we came here with nothing more than a vision, a dream, and some hope, right? And so it took a lot of persistence. It took a lot of work. There was a lot of uncertainty. There was doubts. There was that roller coaster ride of things that were going right, and then something would happen, and it's like, oh my gosh, man, how am I gonna whatever. How am I going to make payroll for my employees? How am I going to do this? How am I going to do that? And I think that oftentimes that's where folks want to quit. And that's why they fail at whatever it is they're trying to do. Obviously, in this case, we're talking a new business, a small business startup. And if you can find a way to persevere and push through that, success lies on the other side of that. And that's exactly what we did. So yeah, I wore a lot of hats at first. I was the guy for everything. You want to talk about IT, you want to talk about doing the books, the hiring, the firing. Obviously, I'm the
Right.
medical provider. I'm the outreach guy, I'm the sales rep. I'm doing every bit of that. And now we've got teams for all of that. And I've got the infrastructure, the systems in place, but it took time to get there. And so I actually think that's really important because I know every facet of the company. And so whenever I have these meetings and these conversations with whoever's leading whatever team, I know what should happen and I can have that intelligent conversation and be able to realize if something's not growing right because hey, I used to be the guy doing that a couple of years ago or whatever. So for someone that's starting a new business that's getting into it, I do think that's really important. Look, there's certain things that you can outsource and delegate, but I would encourage at first for you to do it yourself to at least have some kind of foundation of knowledge there. I think it's really important.
I completely agree. Like any company or any business, having done it yourself, right? Like even having your managers be people who worked at the lower level and have gone through everything and know everything inside and out, and they're not coming in and learning that stuff from anew. And you documented this success in your book, The Recovery Tool Belt. So can you tell us a little bit about that? Is this a book that I would read if I want to start my own clinic? Is this just if I'm a loved one of someone who is struggling with addiction? What kind of book is this and who should read it?
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. Yeah, the Recovery Tool Belt. It's essentially a self-help book. So it's not so much about it's not for someone that's wanting to start a business or run a business. That's not what this is geared towards. This is for someone who is struggling with addiction, substance abuse. This is for a loved one, right? For them, they themselves are not the one struggling, but someone that they care about or that's near them is struggling. Even if someone that, they themselves are not struggling, they really don't have anybody close to them, but they're seeing it in the community, they're seeing it on the news, they're hearing about it, and they want to better educate themselves, absolutely, this book is for you. If you're one of these clinicians that we've already touched on, where, hey, you don't really treat these patients, but you see it from time to time, and you, again, want to better educate yourself on it, this book would be for you as well.
For sure. I think that's really important. And I know, do you plan on writing any other books about like how business wise, how you did it all, or more stuff as you continue to expand your business and see more in the world of addiction treatment? Or do you think the recovery tool belt is the only belt you're going to wear for the time being?
Yeah, man. Hopefully, this is the first of many. I got to get some more traction going on this one. We just released it. I guess we're going on almost 2 weeks now, so it's very
Oh,
fresh. So,
wow. Okay.
very fresh. Yeah. So, I'm newly a published author. So, right now, we're trying to get more traction on it, but I do have more in the pipeline that I want to do. I think that my second book is going to be building off of this tool belt series. That said, yeah, I would love to say something about business and help folks out. There's so many books that are already out there. And so I would have to have my take on that, right? Something that's different.
Yeah.
That's what I did for the Recovery Tool Belt. To my knowledge, there's no other book quite like it out there. I will say, guys, if you're interested in reading it, it's a very easy read. There's not a bunch of huge words in there, a lot of medical jargon. It's not a dry read. There's some humor in there that's intentional so people would actually get through the book and gain
Right.
what's in the book. Look, if it's hard to read, you're just going to put it down, right? So, yeah, we'll see, man. If people decide that, they care about my insight and my experience in business and the success that's followed that and they seem to show interest in that, I would love to put a book out there about that. In the meantime, I'm actually interested in starting my own podcast, Beyond Limits is what it's going to be called. Right now, we're getting everything set up. I have not started yet, but we will talk a lot about that on the podcast.
For sure. And that will be an addiction recovery centered podcast.
Well, more than just that, we're going to talk about business. We're going to talk about mindset. We're going to talk about breaking free of whatever your limits are. That's why it's called Beyond Limits. If you're this person, but you want to become this person, what does it take to get there? Obviously, we'll talk about addiction and everything in there too. But, I'm more than just addiction specialist. I'm an entrepreneur. I own multiple businesses. I'm a nurse practitioner, many things. So we'll talk about all of those on that podcast. We'll have a lot of different types of guests on that podcast.
For sure. So you could say it's a self-improvement and kind of guiding show for people to go to it and improve some part of their life, whether that's business, health, or whatever it may be, mindset.
Exactly. Exactly.
Awesome. And what separates your clinics from just going to rehab or going to AA? What is that kind of extra touch and what is your style of doing things?
Yeah, yeah, I'm glad you asked that question. So oftentimes I've noticed when people say rehab, typically they're referring to inpatient, like residential. You go and stay there for a month or 6 months or something like that. We are outpatient, which means we don't do any overnight stays. We're very different from AA because AA is abstinence based, meaning they don't use medications. I use medications because it's science backed, it's proven, it's evidence based. We've got plenty of very rigorous studies and science to back it up that shows that it works. And again, in my experience, it does work. And so that right there is going to be where we separate from those examples. But another is, man, first and foremost, we meet you where you're at. So if you're somebody that's struggling, you're somebody that's hurting, there is no one size fits all. Yeah, of course, there's a playbook to go off of, but we're going to take that time, get to know you right off the bat, and we're literally going to tailor treatment to you that's struggling. And I think that that is what truly makes a difference. And unfortunately, that's not the norm. but it is the norm for us at Renew Health, and we've got the success stories to back it up.
Right, like you said, that individualized care. And so you mentioned medication, and I know for a lot of people, especially skeptics, they're like, oh, so you're replacing one addiction with another. Now you're reliant on medication. So I do want to dive into that. I've done episodes on anti-puce and naltrexone, and it was the same kind of concerns about, oh, are you just relying on medication now? What does this actually look like? And what would you say to those people who kind of get alarmed when they hear the word medication when it comes to alcohol recovery?
I am so glad you brought this up. It's one of my favorite myths to talk about because to me, it truly is a myth. You're just replacing one thing with another. Well, I think we need to look at what addiction is, which is a chronic disease in my mind and in the medical community. That's how we address it. It's a chronic disease. So, what are some other chronic diseases? Hypertension, which is going to be elevated blood pressure, high cholesterol, diabetes, glaucoma, you name it. Okay, these are all chronic conditions that we treat. How do we treat them? Well, first and foremost, it should be lifestyle changes, meaning, okay, let's use the blood pressure one or diabetes, any of these. Change your habits, change your routines. So, what are you eating? What kind of exercise do you get? Right? If you're not exercising, start exercise. If you eat crap and you eat terrible, stop doing that. Start eating better. And ideally, you're going to see your numbers improve. If the numbers don't improve enough, or if you're not able to stay consistent or even make those changes, what do? We add medications on, right? Or even, if those numbers are high enough, we'll add medications on as well as implement the lifestyle changes. And then over time, if these lifestyle changes, you've actually done it and stayed consistent and they improve, then what do? We go down on the dose of the medications. Ultimately, you could work your way off or you're not on medications at all, but you've got to maintain those lifestyle changes. Again, in this example, we're talking change in nutrition, change in diet, exercise,
Right.
physical habits. So, why wouldn't it be the same for addiction? It's a
Mm.
chronic disease. We treat all these other chronic diseases with medication. Why would we not do the same? It's exactly what we do in Western medicine, right? That's how we treat things here in America and in many parts of the world. So why is it any different? Or is it just because there's a stigma associated with addiction
Right,
often?
that fear factor that if you're an
Mhm.
addict, you have an addictive personality, therefore anything will become an addiction to you. So what can you say on that? I mean, that sounds like a myth in its own that, because you're an addict, you'll get addicted to anything. So now medication is an addiction because you liked alcohol or because you used opioids. So what can you say to that degree?
So, for alcohol specifically, and you had mentioned naltrexone already, good luck being addicted to naltrexone, right? There's
Right.
who's going to
Right.
abuse naltrexone?
Or
So
anti-abuse.
it's a non-addictive substance medication. I mean,
Right.
it's only going to help you. And I would say, well, there's a couple things I could say to it. One, what do you have to lose? Why would you not try it? There's the potential upside is just
Yeah.
astronomical. I mean,
That's what I
let's
always
save
say.
a life. That's a pretty big one, right? If not, it at least changes your life potentially. Or worst case scenario, I don't know, maybe you had a side effect. It made you nauseous or something like that, and you didn't like it. So you just stop using it and you go right back to what you're already doing. You just were uncomfortable for a few days or a couple weeks or however long you tried it. That's one thing I would say to it. But again, addicted to the medication, well, are we going to say that you're addicted to your blood pressure medicine because you want to lower that? I
Mm.
don't think so. I think that it's the way it's that mindset. It's the way that we view it, the way that we approach it, the way that we talk about it. Now, is it once an addict, always an addict? You have an addictive personality, you're going to be addicted to everything? Everybody's different, and there's a lot of factors to talk about here. Some folks, I mean, you hear the stories all the time. They quit cold turkey, they put it down, and they never picked it up. And it's been 40
Yeah.
years later. I've got a grandfather that could attest to that. He never took medication for it. He knew it got out of hand. He started acting out and doing things that he didn't want to do. He put it down and never picked it up. And now the man's 95 years old, right?
Ooh.
So that's one way about it. Another is, yeah, there's a lot of environmental factors, there's genetic factors, there's if there's trauma associated, if there's mental disorders, right? If you're bipolar, schizophrenic, things like that. And so
Right.
again, I think you address these things. And so again, maybe it's medication, maybe it's counseling, maybe it's changing the folks that you're hanging around. If it's an environmental influence because your friends are doing things, right? Well, stop hanging out with those folks. And then it's like, well, those are my friends. Yeah, but are they really? Do they really, if they're just getting you in trouble and if they're using you to better themselves and it's not really going both ways, are they really your friends? Is it really the people you want to be around? Because my friends make me better. My friends
Mm,
support me. My friends build
amen.
me up. My friends help me out when I need help. Those are my friends. And I do the same for them. So I don't know if I answered your question more than just rambled there, but I think
No,
it's
I
a very
like everything you
nuanced.
said. It aligns with a lot of my show, which is I've had people who were doing cocaine and alcohol, and boom, one day quit and never went back. I have had people share stories about addicts who, if you put a line of coke in front of them, they'll jump on it, even though they've been sober for 40 years. They just can't be in the same room as it. Like you said, we've talked about genetics, we've talked about environment, we've talked about peer pressure, we've talked about, nurture versus nature and all of that. And I think, like you said, I know for me, my friends, respect my decision if I don't want to drink or do drugs. And I've had episodes just on the social stigmas around that, around how it's expected of you, especially when you're a young man or woman, to drink or drugs or do one or the other. And so we talk a lot about the societal factors and the influences. So, what can we do to help kind of break down this idea that, like, addicts will be addicted to whatever you give them? I mean, is it just kind of having conversations like this, spreading awareness and understanding that's not true? And I really like what you said, which is something I've always said. For example, I had a episode on red light therapy and low level radiation combination to cure addiction based on endorphin levels. And one of the things I said is, what else do you have to lose? Especially if you're in a person whose life has been ruined by addiction, right? Same thing with the medication, like whether it's anti-Fuse or naltrexone or something else. I mean, let's say worst case scenario, you are addicted to this medication. Well, what are the effects? Because we know what the effects of your alcoholism was. You lost your wife, you lost your kids, you lost your job, or maybe you're high functioning, right? But there's still physical effects, organ failure at some point, liver disease, right? Again, everyone is different, not only in why they're an addict, but also how they're affected as an addict. Like my father, for example, he was never physically affected. It was socially and emotionally and all that, but it took ye decades to catch up to his body. Whereas I've seen other people who, after just 1 year of alcoholism, their body has deteriorated. So I think it's so different in how it's implemented in everyone's life. But I think it's so important that we, like you said, one, you have nothing to lose, but also, I think research versus skepticism is so important. Unfortunately, a lot of people who are addicted are, I think, more skeptical than people who are not addicted to a degree, and especially when they're actively using and abusing. So I think it's important for us as the loved ones to get the information and present it to them in a way that they can understand and digest.
Yeah, very important, man. Education is never going to be a bad thing, right? I think that you've got to educate yourself. There's so many resources that are free that are available. Now, not everything is credible, so it comes down to that individual. And this is where you cross-reference and maybe look at a few different
Right.
sources, right? I mean, hell, even if you're looking at the news and politics, right? I think you should get it from both sides and kind of draw your own instead of just listen to one or the other. I really think that the Recovery Tool Belt, my book, is a great source of that. But yeah, to get back to, what you were initially saying on that is I do think we have to bring awareness. We have to work on destigmatizing this. We have to educate. And then one important thing here too that I think that needs to be differentiated is the term addiction being used versus physical dependence. So like earlier we
Mm,
were talking about being addicted to that medicine. You said naltrexone, you said antabuse. I can guarantee you there ain't nobody addicted to antabuse, man. For folks that know what
yeah.
antabuse does to you, you're not going to get addicted to that. But the difference here is addiction versus physical dependence. And so I'm actually going to pull up the definition because I'm going to say it word for word. I like to use the ASAM definition of addiction, which is the American Society of Addiction Medicine. I think that they
Mm,
have the best. It's actually a really hard thing to define. What is addiction?
right.
So, according to them, the definition of addiction is a treatable chronic medical condition involving complex interaction among brain circuits, genetics, environment, and an individual's life experiences. We've already touched on a lot of that. But the second sentence is the real kicker here, where the point that I'm going to make. People with an addiction use substances or engage in behaviors that become compulsive and often continue despite harmful consequences.
Mm,
I think that's really important because hey, so I'm taking this medication. that I have to take it because it's helping me, right? If I don't take it, I may be uncomfortable, it may change my brain thoughts, whatever. So I must be addicted to it. Well, is that medication causing compulsive behavior that's leading to harmful consequences? Or is it something that you're just dependent upon, right? And so that's the nature of, opioids, right? You causes a physical dependence. I've had patients come in many times. I mean, right off the bat, I've got one of my patients, he's an older gentleman that came in, and he has never once abused opioids. What he's done is he's taken his prescription as prescribed by his doctor, and he came in saying, "Hey, man, I'm addicted to this stuff." I said, "Well, no, you're not. But you do have a physical dependence because that's the
Mm.
nature of how opioids work. You have a physical dependence to it because you've been taking it for a long time because you have chronic pain and your doctor's been prescribing to, but you're not an addict. You don't fall into that category of of addiction and abusing this medication. So I think that's an important differentiation to distinguish. And I think that that comes down to, educating yourself and again, destigmatizing.
I really appreciate you sharing that because it's very eye-opening. Just like I had an episode with Dr. Brian LeQuinn, and we discussed the difference between sober and dry, and how so many people use the word sober, but they're only dry. So I really liked that conversation, and I think this is also very well aligned with that. I think there is a big difference between physical dependence and addiction, and I appreciate you sharing that. And I think we need to focus on both, of course, but I think that helps a lot with people who are going through it because this villainization of addiction. And so I think people, and I've actually had some guests who they don't like the way AA is because they're like, I'm not an alcoholic. I was and now I'm not. And there's a lot of debate over that. Some people like to keep reaffirming that, truth to themselves so that they don't relapse. And some people like to move on and have a new identity. So that's a whole conversation on its own. And I think, like we're going to say with everything here, whatever is best for you. If you're a person who's like, I need every day to wake up and tell myself I'm an addict, so I don't, choose to go after that substance again, then do that. But if you're a person who needs to wake up and say, I'm not an addict, I'm living a new life, I'm a new person, then do that. I think, like you said, that's so important to have that individualized care. But I appreciate you sharing that definition. And we're gonna have your website in the description below for people to check out, everything that you have. And just in case I missed it, do you do virtual appointments at all, or is it all in person only?
Yeah, definitely. So we absolutely do virtual appointments. We are statewide in the state of New Mexico. We're only within New Mexico,
Okay.
but we do the telehealth statewide.
Okay. I just want to verify that for everyone. So, you
Yep.
weren't getting phone calls from Alaska then saying, hey, but
Thanks for mentioning that. Yeah, we're only in the state of New Mexico, but hey, so that's a huge reason why I wrote this book, actually, because
right.
I only practice in New Mexico and I want to help folks out. Just because you're not in New Mexico doesn't mean that I don't want to help you, right? And so this book has just broadened that reach. And so, really, I mean, worldwide, it's going to apply worldwide. This is not, you mentioned AA, and which is very systematic in that approach. This book is not written that way because we've already talked about I got to meet you where you're at, right? I got to
Right.
tailor this to you. Well, I'm not meeting you where you're at, and I'm not tailoring anything to you if I say, here's the book, it's one size fits all, do it step by step. And so
Mm.
that's not how this book is by any means. This book is called the Recovery Tool Belt because it's full of tools. That's all I do. That's all I do for my patients. I give you a tool. It's on you to use that tool, right? If all you've got's a hammer, everything's a nail type deal. But if I give you the tools and then you don't actually put them into practice, if you don't take action and take those next steps, it doesn't do anything. So that's what this book is. It's full of tools, and I truly think it's going to change lives and save lives.
Right. So, ladies and gentlemen, if you like Mr. Carter, but you're not in, that area locally, the book is there as well as in the future, the podcast
That's
as
right.
as of right now, and so just always go back and check for that whenever that comes out. But the book is out now, brand new, in fact. So go ahead and if you read it and enjoy it, leave a review to help spread that so we can reach more people with these tools, both the loved ones and the addicts. But Mr. Carter, before we leave here, what would be your final message either to people who are addicted or physically dependent or the loved ones, if not both?
Man, I'm going to say there's so much help out there. I think we've already touched on this, but there's so many resources available. Even in an area like what I said, Roswell, a few years ago, back up whenever I first started Renew Health, there was hardly anything available, but there's still resources out there. We have the internet, we have Google, we have Chat GPT, we have friends, we have support systems. There is so much out there. And again, this isn't just for, I don't care what it is. If it's wanting to start a business, if it's wanting to get back in shape, if it's wanting to repair your marriage, if it is, in fact, you're abusing alcohol, let's say, and you want to stop doing that, there's so much out there. But that's only the first step. That's only the first part of the equation. Look, knowledge is not power, knowledge is potential power, meaning, so you go out, you start educating yourself, you find these resources, but if you don't take action, if you don't actually implement it, it didn't do anything. And I would say it's worse to have the knowledge, but then to not act
Right.
on it. So you've got to reach out to whoever it is, whatever it is, to try to better educate yourself. And then you've got to implement that into practice. And that's where change happens. Again, success lies on that other side.
Right. And ladies and gentlemen, I want you to take this episode as not only are there so many resources out there nowadays, but if you find a gap anywhere in your research where you're not finding what you need, Mr. Carter is an example of someone who went and filled that gap, right? He created those resources, the recovery tool belt, the clinics, right? So if you can't find in your local area or wherever it may be, online or in person, go ahead and make those resource provisions for others. Be an entrepreneur. Like not all of us expect that in life, right? Usually it's unexpected, but all you have to do is have that good heart. You've got a lot of knowledge online about starting a business and resources and good people to support you to figure out, all right, what can we do now with this gap? How can we fix it or set up the foundation to fix it and bring others along? So, Mr. Carter, thank you for doing that in your local area and then through your book and podcast, around the globe. I really appreciate you taking the time today to come on this show and spread those resources even further.
Sure thing. Thank you very much for having me on. I love that you just said that, man. That's where a successful business story starts, right? What's the void? And serve it. Supply and demand.
Sailing through the ocean blue, nuclear reactors my crew, guiding the ship, the stars as our guide, through the waves we ride, jokes and laughter fill the air. On this voyage we have to share, working together, side by side, as one family we will abide. In the heart of the ship we reside, nuclear operators with pride, powering the vessel with every stride. Our mission, a source of great pride.